Hi, everybody. Nick Bradley here. Welcome to another episode of Scale Up Your Business. It's another fireside chat, and I have my good friend, fellow podcaster, Sam Harris, joining me, and he's going to be releasing this on his fantastic podcast as well. So, Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick. And I guess welcome to the show. Another episode of the Growth Mindset podcast we have going on here. I'm very pleased to welcome Nick Bradley to the episode. And yeah,
it is funny, isn't it, when you do this? But you know what? I like these ones because, like, as I said, we can kind of riff back and forward on a couple of topics.
Yeah, definitely. It's nice.
Yeah. And people get to learn you on my show and vice versa. And, you know, we don't have to make it overly formal, which, there's no fire. It's relatively nice weather here in the UK as we do this.
Yeah.
And we're probably, how many miles away from each other? Probably about 300.
Yeah, well, I'm in Cornwall now, actually. So maybe a bit more. Oh, no, that's about right. I've messed that up. Yeah. Probably about 300. Exactly.
So let's kick off with how we met. I think that's probably a good place to start, isn't it? And then we can talk about some different things today.
Yeah.
So I found your podcast, the Growth Mindset podcast, first, because I love talking about mindset on the show, and I'm sure we'll cover a lot of that today. But yeah, I mean, that was it, wasn't it? And then we met up in London once and had a bit of a chat.
Yeah, exactly. This nice guy reached out to me. I think your podcast was, you're on like the 20th, 30th episode by then. It was a bit of a newer thing for you. And now, it was smashing it. You were growing quite well at the time, but I think you've really done a good job.
It's grown a lot since. I'm up to 170 episodes now. And I do 2 a week and have been doing that consistently, particularly this last 12 months with the whole COVID thing. I put more content out there. But the thing that made the biggest difference for me, Sam, was guesting on other people's podcasts, but doing that not just randomly, doing it in a kind of very systemized way. So I've now been on, I think it's coming up to 90 podcasts, mainly in the US, in the last 12 months alone. And that has tripled the listenership of Scale Up Your Business.
Wow.
Yeah. So that a lot of time to do that, but we're now doing anywhere between 25,000 to 30,000 downloads per month.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't do a lot, but I've just been running the show for a lot longer. So yeah, that's actually what I've been doing over the past month or so, is a lot more guesting. And interestingly, came up in a conversation I had yesterday on a guesting episode that I did, which was a fireside-ish chat like this. The guy runs an agency for booking guestings and things. And he was also thinking about maybe turning it into a platform. So we actually ended up having a bit of a discussion around what I'm doing with Syncify, which is a social community for podcasting where you can find friends and sort of listen to the same things and give each other recommendations. And the hosts can claim their profiles and connect with their audiences. But he also wants to add a layer, which is something we've been thinking about, of letting you sort of say as a host that you are accepting guests, and as a person, as a listener, you can kind of fill in your profile a bit more and see who's accepting guests and apply to different podcasts to be on them, and just turn that into sort of a bit of a matching platform at the same time, which we may end up doing because it certainly really helps. And as podcasters, it's just such a good way to go about growing your show. It's just connecting with other podcasters and sort of featuring each other and making good content.
And I think you've got to do it the right way as well. I mean, certainly the last 4 months, in fact, the whole of this year, really, I've doubled down on Clubhouse. So I've got 44,000 followers there now. And from that has opened up incredible guest opportunities. So Grant Cardone last week, Jesse Itzler, who owns the Atlanta Hawks NBA team, we've got him coming up very soon. But, it's all come from standing on stage in Clubhouse. So back to sort of, social media apps and connections and all those sort of things, game changing if you get prepared to put the time into it. The one thing I would say, though, is there are a lot of bookers out there. Obviously, it's a business, but the problem is they sometimes try to kind of come on my show or put people on the show, and they just want it to be like some sort of infomercial. Right. I don't mind people promoting their stuff. We all do that.
That's but cool. It's so annoying.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It just feels so soulless. You just get these so many emails to my show of just be oh, this person's great. Just do that. And they're just trying to sell a book or their business. Or something.
Well, I had one of the ones I had the other day, which was really just, I get why they do it, but it was they dictated in bullet points, this is what you will do. right?
Yeah,
Like it was
yeah.
like, and the person they were promoting, the person they were promoting wasn't like it was Gary Vaynerchuk coming on, which if they did that, I might listen. But it was some guy I'd never heard of. And it was like, and you will promote this and you will do this and there'll be a link and there's affiliates.
Oh,
And I
wow.
just said, I don't do it. I know. I said, I don't do it. I don't touch that.
Yeah, yeah. No chance.
Crazy. So let's talk a little bit about, so you started, as you said, we met, and your show, your program's been going longer than mine, but the Growth Mindset podcast, let's kick off there. Because I think the thing that connected us, was this real interest and curiosity around mindset and, kind of how important that is in business, in life, and that sort of thing. So why did you start the Growth Mindset podcast? What was the kind of origin of that?
I think I just got quite into mindsets, and obviously, the Growth Mindset book and stuff. And I did a bit of coaching when I was younger, and realized that most of the success wasn't like any specific piece of knowledge that I imparted onto people, like this is how you do X or something. It was more the mindset and the beliefs of that they could work for something. So I was coaching one girl who was like just a really crap college where like everyone just got like D's or like lower. And I think she was in like a biology class where there were 3 other students, and she was the only one that even managed to get D's. Everyone else was just completely failing. And I didn't actually have that many sessions with her to really sort of teach her whole biology course, but I just kind of put it in her mind, like the mindset that actually she could get A's and she could do really well, and like just the sort of style of work that she needed to like take herself seriously on doing. And then it just kind of changed the way she approached it. And then she got like A stars in all of her A levels, got like a funded scholarship to go to uni and stuff. And I was like, what the shit? How did and it's just so weird that she went from having like no faith in herself to like doing so well just from like her changes in mindset. And like from that I was like, okay, there's so much people can do when they just like believe in themselves better and like just approach like the way they're doing things with better mindsets. So I kind of wanted to learn more about them. I wanted to have reasons to talk to cool people about them and like share that information and help people. So that's kind of what really kicked me off into it.
Yeah, interesting. And what about you personally, though? Did you have to sort of go through anything in your, say, life or business or career, whatever, that kind of had to get you thinking more about how you show up, how you think about things?
Yeah, so I think once I then started the podcast, I got a lot better at these things. But even when I was younger, I think I always had the attitude of curiosity, and being outside of my comfort zone was always something that I enjoyed. And I think I started to realize like there were things that were obviously outside of my comfort zone and things that I didn't even kind of realize I could do. So like, for example, when I was learning to ski, is like, I think I started when I was 16, but I just always make sure that I fell over at least like every half a day. And if I hadn't pushed myself hard enough. And I just improved so fast that like my friends that have been skiing for ages, I was better than them like within 2 weeks. And it was just like, that was really cool to like be pushing myself with the comfort zones there, doing scary things. But then things like stuff that I just thought were fundamentally a part of me, like being scared of speaking and being on stage and that kind of stuff, I kind of realized was just another thing that I could push, and I could step outside of my comfort zones in like smaller ways and like slowly grow that, and then start a podcast and then start doing like bigger speeches and things. And so like last year I ended up doing like a TED speech, and I went into stand-up comedy and things. And that's like so far from like the 16-year-old me who literally pretended to have lost his notes during a speech so I could just sit down early during my GCSEs because I just couldn't like handle being on stage at all, kind of thing.
But did anyone influence you, I suppose, is the question here, in terms of to lean in? Because a lot of people don't know how to do that. They don't just wake up one day and realize and say they're going to do hard things, right?
Yeah.
Because they realize growth sits through that. Usually you have someone, open that up in you, awaken that in you.
I think, I've been inspired by quite a few different people in different areas. I think my parents taught me that I had the responsibility for my success was completely on me. When I had like a lot of friends that would maybe get like £50 for an A or something, and I was like, oh, so parents, like maybe I could like add some money from you guys, and I could propose to them like, oh, maybe there could be some kind of system if I do well in my exams or something. And they just sort of let my dad literally stop the car, turned around and said to me like, Sam, like this is on you, this is your life. If you get A's, like this is going to benefit the rest of your life. And so that did definitely make me realize that I kind of had to work for everything and change the way I think about things, and did install in me, like, because I was really bad at English, even though I had the power to like do better in that without sort of sitting back and just being comfortable with where I was at rather than thinking that I could do things that were more difficult. Yeah, trying to think.
I got it. It's funny because you've done some pretty out there stuff, right? So you've climbed mountains, dangerous mountains.
Yeah.
You've nearly died a few times. Obviously, speaking on stage is difficult in its own right. I've got better over time. I certainly wasn't great when I was at school. But stand-up comedy, man, that's something that still scares me to this day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That concept of you're just not funny, right? Not you, but the concept of not being funny. So why? And obviously, you kind of doing ultra marathons now. We were talking about that. We have that connection, which is similar. So there must be a sort of belief in you, Sam, which is doing hard things makes you grow. Is there a vision behind that? Is there I'm not gonna say an end game, but is there you're trying to improve yourself every day type of mentality?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a mix of curiosity, perhaps that I just get quite easily bored, and I don't like doing things that are easy. If I know I can do something, it's already kind of boring, if that makes sense. And so that has always pushed me to do other things. I haven't been very employable. If you want me to just stick and just do the same job and be good at something, it's not that interesting. I'd rather be oh, well, I can do product management. How about I can go into growth, or I can do marketing where I have no idea what I'm doing. And it's not too good for being fixed in a normal job role, where entrepreneurship and just throwing yourself in the deep end where you have no idea what's going on and just having to work it out is where I feel much more comfortable. Because I don't know why, I've just always learned that whenever I'm doing something that I'm not quite good enough to do, I quickly get there. And so that's where I really like being, is somewhere where I am learning as fast as possible, because there's just a fire under your ass to actually force you to do those things. So that's always been a bit of an outlook that I've had. And I guess I'd be interested to see with you, because you've certainly done a lot of interesting things yourself. And is that maybe why you went into ultramarathons and sort of buying and selling businesses that you do, which is pretty cool in an area that actually I'm not too aware of, and I'm still would love to know a bit more about how you do that, because currently you start a business and you can own it and stuff, but just using leverage to buy different businesses and scale them up, it still blows my brains a bit. And I've been listening to your podcast and it's great, and I still feel a bit it's doing that.
Yeah, well, listen, I think with everything else that you've done, Sam, you'd actually take to it pretty easily. I suppose, what's interesting about what you said about comfortable being uncomfortable, and that's obviously one of your values, right? For me, it's kind of similar with a bit of a nuance. So I do believe in growth, and I do get bored easily with certain things, but I also love the concepts of precision and focus and leverage. I'm probably a bit impatient, right? I'm not great at the kind of enjoying the journey sort of thing. I wish I was.
Yeah.
I wish I was better at that. But if I set my mind on something, I want to get there yesterday. And I've had to slow down a lot, or teach myself to slow down to appreciate things in a way that I think will probably make me happier. So I'm pretty comfortable, in terms of how I feel about stuff, but I'm also quite restless is probably the thing around it. So ultra marathons, the reason I started doing long endurance athletic events was because it was the only time, certainly when I started doing it over a decade ago, even longer, that I actually felt present. Because now you've done a few. There's a point in an ultra marathon where it's kind of hard to think about anything else for a while.
Yeah.
You're sort of just there, and everything's really intensified, right? Everything kind of hurts and all that. And then there's a point in an ultra marathon where you have to kind of almost meditate while you're running, right? It's hard to explain to people when unless you've done it, but you have to, your mind, you learn a lot about yourself and your capabilities. But I started doing that because it gave me presence. It gave me a feeling of being kind of in the moment. Otherwise, I was trying to look too far forward all the time. So it kind of slowed me down just simply because of the sheer hardness of it. And then into the buying and selling businesses, back to my point around leverage, a lot of people think that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to start a business, right? And to some extent, people think the definition of entrepreneurship is something like that, right? And I do believe that you should start a business at some point in your life. I think everyone should have the experience, sort of like a rite of passage to do that, particularly if you're like what we've described, a bit sort of don't want to do what everyone else does, challenge things a bit. But the reason I focus on acquisitions is I call it, and it's not my title, but it's a kind of term for it, is what I call acquisition entrepreneurship. So if you want to become an entrepreneur, but you don't want to start a business, you want to buy a good, profitable business that has foundations in place, and you simply have to optimize, improve, then if the outcome that you're looking for is freedom, financial freedom, wealth, ability to do what you want with whoever you want, whenever, all that sort of thing, if that's your outcome, if that's your result, you can do it much more quickly and precisely through acquisitions, particularly now, than what you can through startup. That's my experience of it.
It does sound so far from like you talking about the experiences that happens, but it's still, yeah, both my brains a little bit.
I probably make it sound easy, Sam, but I have done this for a long time. But like, definitely. I bet you're a good podcaster now, right? And you're a great speaker and all that sort of stuff. I bet when you first started, you were pretty average.
Yes, for sure.
Same with buying businesses. Like in the beginning, it looks overwhelming. It looks hard. How do I do this? But you know what? It's actually really simple.
Yeah.
You just got to learn it. Once you learn it, then applying it is a mindset thing. There's a heap of mindset in acquisitions, huge amount. And then you just got to stay focused and execute.
I guess it's one of those things that like you're always a bit suspicious. Like in terms of like if you're buying a car like directly from someone, you're always like, oh, is it actually got like a bit of a rattle that isn't always there? And maybe once I've got it and I use it, like there's problems with it. As in, why is this person selling their business? Is there like some fundamental flaws because they know the market better and it's about to like go tits up or something? Or is it actually that like they're about to like move house and they just want to go do something else with their life? And I just feel like I'd always be like a bit worried of how I'd really know if the fundamentals of the business were correct or not.
Yeah. But again, back to what I said, part of that's mindset and belief systems, right? But the thing is, the way that I do it and the way that I teach it is that it's a structured system. So when you're going through the process of finding deals, first and foremost, you're looking for deals that meet your specification first. So, the industries that you want to have a business in, geography, all those sort of things. So first, I often say to people, if they want to get into this game, buy a business that you know something about the industry. You don't have to be an expert, but at least you understand what the business does, right? That's the first thing. Then you go through a process of deal sourcing. And I advise people to buy businesses off people who are retiring. So in their 60s or 70s. And there's two reasons for that. One is, why they're selling it, right? Pretty much. Yeah. They just don't want to spend another 10 years in a business they've spent 30 years in. And quite often they haven't got a succession plan. So there isn't really anyone that the business is going to go to. So the next obvious choice for that business owner is to close it. So that means you're going to get the business at a very, very good price. The other point is that these people, not everyone, but if you and I were selling a business now, being a bit younger, the money's important, right? A lot of people, when they're in their late 60s, early 70s, they've made quite a bit of money. And actually the most important thing for them is enjoying time. So they're not necessarily trying to get a massive valuation. And then the last piece, which is probably the most interesting for, again, people like you and us who understand things like social media, digital marketing, even a website. I mean, I buy businesses, Sam, that haven't got websites. And you speak to the 75-year-old owner and they go, I don't need a website. I have a person put pamphlets in, everyone's letterboxes around the local area. And so all of a sudden you go and get a basic website, right? Get one on Wix or something and, start to do a little bit of like Facebook advertising in your local area and you can double or triple the business really quickly, but it's already been built on solid foundation. So that's why it's a compelling opportunity versus starting something which hasn't got a proven market, hasn't got a proven set of customers, recurring revenue, all of those risky things that if you get them right, it's great, but you've got to build all that from scratch, which is a lot of hard work. Yeah, that does sound much more sensible than just starting a business because it's always a bit of a gamble. It's a different way of doing it. Yeah. It's a different way of doing it. People ask me this all the time, say, I want to be more entrepreneurial. Should I start a business or should I buy an existing one? And I don't say, I very much lean to the acquisition side because that's what I do, but I don't push that on anybody. I say, listen, if you really want to be the startup person, go and do it. And you might be super successful, but just realize that there are other options out there for you as well. So what about like the financing of them buying a business? Because of, you can be a uni student in your room at home and start a company with nothing. And like, there's no barriers to entry now, but how do you buy a business? Okay, back to the point I mentioned beforehand about the very specific type of person I'm looking to buy a business from. The reason for that, and the statistics are out there, it's all over Forbes magazine at the moment. They're talking about this being the best time in history to buy an existing business. There's 10,000 baby boomers retiring every single day in North America, but that's a global trend. So you've got more people retiring or retirement age that have these great businesses. So back to my point I said beforehand, you can get these things for very, very little money, because the psychology is like, they just don't want the business anymore. I've never been given a business, but I know people who have been given a business. And I'm not talking about a business that's distressed and losing money. I'm talking about a business that's making hundreds of thousands of profit per year, given. Like no money changes hands other than legal fees and things like that, right?
Yeah.
But the way that I recommend it is you do what is called leverage buyouts. So you're leveraging the assets in the business to pay for the business. And what that's like is, if you have a mortgage on a house, you get to live in that house. You get to enjoy that house for like 25, 30 years before you actually own it, because you're paying it back every single month to the mortgage lender, to the bank. So what I often advise people to do is, first and foremost, let's say a business is worth £500,000, just as a round number. So you look at that and go, okay, well, let's say that's 3 times the profits. So for round numbers again, let's say the profit's about 150, 160 grand a year. I'm going to pay you 3 times that for the business. So that's, around about £500,000. Then I look at the business and go, okay, I've got 160,000 of profit per year, and I can grow that, but I'm just going to look at what it's currently making. I'm going to look at the assets in the business. And that's things like, sometimes it's property, but it can be receivables. That's where people have to pay you, but they haven't paid you yet. So it's a very liquid form of asset. And you can go and get finance against the receivables list. So you can get that finance, so you get a loan, debt loan, and you pay that back over 10 years. Okay. Then you agree, and this is what I recommend, you agree with the seller that you are going to do what we call deferred payments or seller financing. So you're going to pay, this is crazy, this will blow your mind. You're going to pay the business owner back, usually over a 3 to 4 year period, from the profits of the business that you're buying from them. And the deals that I do, I normally do about 50% of the asking price. So back to my example, if the price of the business is 500 grand, I normally agree 250 grand over 3 to 4 years that I'm going to pay back as deferred payments. So if you think about this, the business is doing 160 grand a year. I'm going to be paying back, let's say 60 or 70 grand a year in deferred payments, plus a small amount back in asset finance. Then I'm still going to be having an existing business that's going to be giving me 50 grand a year after I've paid back all those other liabilities. And I've only had to put in a certain amount of money to get the legal fees, the accountancy fees done.
Yeah.
So you can buy a business for 10, 20 grand that's worth $500,000 of your own cash.
Nice.
That makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. It sounds a bit like almost too good to be true. Kind of like the things you hear about, like it's like flipping houses all the time, and it's like a bit over salesy about it, and like actually isn't the fundamental business. But I'm like,
well, it doesn't happen. It's not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be really clear. It's not like, you're just going to call up the first person that, down the road who's got a business and suddenly you're going to get this amazing deal. I normally have 20 to 30 deals in process at any one time to close 1 to 2. So you've got to think of it like any sort of sales funnel, but the opportunities are out there. I mean, I had a person who worked with me, and they literally finished a program I was running. They found the business they now own within the first 6 days, and they completed the deal within 6 weeks. And they put £22,000 of their own money into that business, which was worth about £440,000. True story. Yep, did it straight. Now that's an exceptional story. So I do want to be super clear. I was like, oh my God, wow, like that timing, but it does happen. It can happen.
Wow. Where do you go to find these people? Do you just like cold call people that like have been running a business for 30 years, or do they actually sort of advertise that they maybe are for sale and things?
It's everything, as I said, is a structure. So the best place to find these deals is through lawyers, accountants, and wealth advisors, or financial advisors, wealth managers, because usually the first person that someone will speak to when they want to sell a business is one of those professional services. So like, it's quite funny. I was looking at a deal recently, and the guy is 72, and he told his accountant before he told his wife, which I thought was quite funny, but I can understand. He said, I'm thinking I want to sell the business in the next 6 to 12 months. So what I say to people is build a good network with accountants in your local area if you want to buy a business close to you. There are websites out there that have businesses listed for sale. If you're in the US, there's a website called Biz Buy Sell, and you can actually search on that website for businesses that actually are quite happy to do seller financing, deferred payments. There are heaps on there, like literally, thousands. And so the other thing I'd say is I've done 117 acquisitions in my career, right? And that's over private equity as well, when I was working in private equity. And not one of those deals was ever 100% of the cash price of the business up front, ever. So what I'm explaining to people here is actually how private equity, like, again, it's one of those mysterious things that people hear, but that's how private equity do deals for years. No one puts all their own cash into buying something. So it sounds crazy if you've never heard it before, but it's just kind of how that sort of world of financing works. So Syncify, you mentioned it beforehand. What is it?
So Syncify is a podcasting community platform where essentially it works like any other podcast app, apart from you have like profiles and you can see the other users and make friends with your friends if they're on there, and basically engage around the podcasts and the media that you enjoy. So instead of just listening in a completely siloed nature, you can discover like the best content that your friends have enjoyed. You can like recommend things to them. You can sort of have discussions around the content and like actually talk about what was interesting, and maybe like make some notes around like maybe this one where we're speaking about buying and selling businesses. Maybe you've got some other friends that you thought about doing that with and you haven't quite thought about it, but like talk about these things and it'd be really interesting. And maybe you got some further follow-up questions for you, Nick, and like I could put that on the episode notes and you could respond to me and I could actually connect with the podcast hosts. And it just makes it a place for active engagement around the media as opposed to just siloed listening, which I just never found as fulfilling as it could be. So
it sounds similar to Clubhouse. I mean, I tried something interesting the other day, and we'll obviously come back and talk a bit more about what you're building. But I was doing live interviews on Clubhouse and I did 4 actually. I did Mario Nafal. So we kind of connected. Yeah. So Mario and I are actually doing a podcast together very soon. So it's going to be called The Round Table, and we're going to be co-hosts, which is quite weird. But
that's hilarious.
It is hilarious, isn't it? I know we're good friends now. After meeting on Clubhouse, strangely, and but anyway, the point was I interviewed him for Scale Up Your Business in Clubhouse. Because of the way they've got restrictions on what you can record or not, you have to be very transparent. So I only had myself and Mario on stage, and then I stopped recording at the end, and then we had about 400 people in the room, and I invited people up on stage. So the last half an hour of the show, if you want to call it that, even though it wasn't recorded, was engagement based on the 30-minute interview that I did with Mario. And it was really good, Sam. I mean, it's like a live, like being there live to hear the conversation, but then being able to interact. Is that sort of what you're thinking about as well?
Yeah, exactly. Great example.
I like it. No, I think just to make it real for people listening, but I do think that the world of social media and social media platforms is moving more towards that. We know video and voice is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, but the idea that you can interact with the people who are having those conversations, I think, is the next shift. What already is the next shift.
Yeah, definitely. And just it's the whole thing around like influencers becoming much bigger, but it is sort of part of your community. Those are the people that you do want to be engaging with. And there's more and more capability like YouTube and podcasts for people to go really, really niche. You get these very specific communities where people are like super engaged with very like, it's not necessarily have to like a huge audience, but like they are really involved with these things. And like if you can help these people then connect, it's just like a much more interesting place for them to be, as opposed to like the whole traditional media where it was like, okay, TV show to millions of people. It's like, okay, it's a podcast with like a few thousand listeners who like really engage on this one specific area, and it's much more like enjoyable and like it's the place for you as a listener. So yeah, I've got a lot of well, obviously I'm pretty bullish on the area because I'm putting a lot of time into it. But maybe my next project is buying someone else's business, but we'll see. For now, I really think.
Well, who knows, mate? This thing could take off for you, and then it could end up being like, your empire could come off the back of the startup, and then you're just going to buy other media platforms across the world.
Yeah, so that's one of the things. Is even if this doesn't become like $1 billion business straight away, it's just like the area it's in. There's so much potential to build other businesses upon. That I think I would look more around like actually using Syncify as a vehicle to acquire like other companies from within, if that makes sense, rather than doing it as like
it does. And it's a really good point, because a lot of people think that when you start a business, your only pathway to growing that business is through, your marketing activity, how you build awareness, engagement, how you, drive leads, how you convert. But the strategic side of growth is really two things. It's partnerships. So, how can you, even things like affiliates and things like that, and it's acquisitions, it's acquiring assets is probably the best way of saying that. And what I often say, it doesn't matter how big you are. I actually have a couple of startups that I advise currently that are just doing acquisitions before they've even really developed their core offering, because they've managed to get funding to do that, because they realize that 1 + 1 = 3, or even 1 + 1 = 11. It's just a quicker way of getting to what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. We did actually, I have acquired one thing. Like our company acquired basically the CTO, and he'd been building a similar app to us and had like a lot more tech skills. So we actually acqui-hired him and his skills, which wasn't so difficult on the financing side of these things.
That's one of the reasons to do acquisitions as well, is you acquire not just customers, revenue, products that another company may have. You can acquire talent, right? And that's quite a cool way. But I was going to ask you, how's your experience been? How many businesses have you started, Sam? Is this the first one, or have you done
quite a few now? Yeah, I started my first at uni when I was 20, and that one went quite well. I grew it over 4 years and did manage to sell it. If I sold it a year earlier, it would have been worth a lot more. I just sort of learned a lot of things in that process of things going wrong in the last year.
Oh yes, that happens, mate. You should have called me up. I would have given you a checkered history of my. I've had a heap of failures well, I call them failures because they didn't end up how I wanted them to end up, but they weren't failures in terms of what I learned from them to apply down the line.
Yeah, sure. Right. Yeah, exactly. It was super useful, and that business, I guess always had the attitude of I'm a student. Like, as long as I kind of make as much money as I would have spent like in a coffee shop or something, that's already like totally winning. Just like have a business that's running, and I still made like a lot of money out of it and like learned so much. It's basically like I got like 2 degrees in one kind of thing doing it. So that was great. But yeah, since then I've started a few different businesses. I worked in a few startups for a bit, kind of treated them as like internships basically. And that was really fun. Some went quite well. Some like kind of failed. Some I just was like, realized that just wasn't the thing for me. So yeah, mix. I tried to put a number on it. I don't even know. I think at least 10 that I sort of took seriously. Maybe like 30 that I'd like.
As you said beforehand,
yeah.
Well, it's funny. Once you start to explore entrepreneurship or the concept of entrepreneurship, it's hard to see anything else. How sometimes people talk about, remember the Matrix, the whole red and the blue pill.
Exactly.
it's like, why would I, cap my earnings to travel on a train, an hour every day, each way to go to a square box, to sit there and try and do something. I know people want certainty and security, but when you realize that you can have much more control, if you like, or you can, design kind of what you want your life to be like, even though you have to step on the other side of fear to do it, it's a much more liberating way of living, in my opinion.
Definitely. It's I kind of infected my current business partner, who he was still thinking that maybe like another 4 or 5 years before he went and started his own business. But I was like, no, this is the time. Simplify is going to make sense. You've got all the right skills to sort of do the growth side of this business. And he was a bit reluctant initially, but now he's like, I can never have a job again, Sam. Like, this is not happening.
No, exactly. I think once you're in there and you realize that you can make a success of it, whatever that.
Yeah, definitely.
That changes it. Why don't we talk, because we connected, I think, around mindset quite a lot. And we've touched a little bit on it, I think, in various ways on our chat today. Why don't we spend a little bit more time on it to finish off our conversation for everyone? Because
makes sense.
It would make sense, considering your podcast is called, the Growth Mindset Podcast, and I started Scale Up Your Business when actually what I said is 80% of the podcast is mindset. I just don't have it written on the front of it. But just to talk about, the importance of mindset overall, and let's go to all the conversations you've had with some amazing people on your show. What are some of the things that you've taken away, to develop your understanding of mindset and I suppose your application of it?
Oh, I've learned so many different things. It's almost become a bit too many. I probably should just write down like my 3 favorites or go-to answers, maybe, perhaps. I have really learned the power of communicating a lot more, because like I said, I was scared of like standing up in public speaking, but also I wasn't the most confident speaker in any kind of way. And I've really learned the value of I mean, one, networking like through the podcast and learning from others, and there's just so many ways of thinking that you're not aware of, and that you just get so fixed in your own sort of mindsets of what you're capable of or how things should be. You're not even aware of like what your fixed mindsets are, that you sort of take for granted, and then having someone else sort of able to kind of show you these things is just so powerful. So I think I've become much more confident in the power of like coaching. You just listening to other people, and that there's just so many mindsets that you're not even aware of, that you're like limiting yourself in one way, and that you really can just change. There's so many things that you maybe think you're just stuck with. Yeah, it's just so possible. And like something that I've always been so much better at believing in other people, of how they can change and grow. And like I always believe that other people are fundamentally good and that they'll want to. And I've always been available for them and helping to coach them. And I just haven't necessarily always recognized that in myself, or like even when I'm starting businesses, I'll focus on my own problems, and like, oh, I'm not so good at this and on that, and like I feel like I'm just sort of destined to be terrible at something. But then talking to people, you're like, okay, actually I can deal with that. But that's, I feel like, a bit of a
no, I think that's really powerful. But there's a couple of things you said there which I believe in 100%, is most of the stuff that we achieve or don't achieve is based on our view of ourselves, our identity. And if you have a limiting view of that, in other words, because there's a thing, I think it was Carol Dweck's book, I think that's her name, on mindset. Yeah. She talks about, a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And she speaks quite eloquently about that, saying that if you've got a fixed, or writes about, I should say, if you've got a fixed mindset, you don't believe that you can improve. You believe that what you have is what you've got. The idea that if something happens to you, then that's what it is. Like, that's the whole victim piece. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, you believe that you can learn new things, you can try different skills, become more proficient with practice over time. So it's a much more empowering thought or concept. It happens to be true, of course, as well, because there's too many examples of it being true everywhere that we look. But it's a much more empowering way just to live. But a lot of people struggle, I think, with even the concept.
Definitely. And I think a lot of what I've learned from coaching and such is just getting people out of their own way, as in we have a lot of reinforced negative beliefs that we kind of fall into, or maybe the people around us sort of breed in us as well, in the culture of things. And most things is just sort of helping people realize where they're making mistakes, or that they don't need to be doing things in certain ways, and that you can basically just always change if you can get people to get out of their own way on things, which is quite empowering to sort of realize that you can do that for other people, and then realize that there's probably so many things that you're getting in your own way about that you don't need to be, and just sort of then trying to like step out and get other perspectives on what things you maybe are doing wrong, or just not allowing yourself to even think about, in the same way that I'm just talking to you today around like how to buy and sell businesses, where I just kind of thought that like it's probably impossible and just shouldn't think about it, and like, okay, actually, yeah, that's a completely different way of perspective. I can look at this, and that has completely changed the way I view that as a thing to do, because it suddenly makes so much more sense now that I've actually like bothered to like step out of my own limited beliefs on it.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it, because I mean, all I explained, when we chatted 20 minutes ago, was I gave you a process from my experience of doing a lot of this, and a bit of education of how it all works. So because what you described is what a lot of people think, not just about buying businesses, but in general. But actually, all that happened is you just suddenly have had a better level of competency based on my experience of explaining the situation to you. So all of a sudden, your mindset is now shifted.
Yeah. Cheers.
So it's an important thing just to draw a line on, not because we were talking about acquisitions, but just for anyone listening to this on either of our podcasts, is just look at that example, right? Because that will be an example, I think, that can be applied to a lot of people in terms of other situations that they're looking at.
Yeah, definitely.
Out of all the guests you've had on, is there one or two that just jump out as they made you think significantly differently? I know it's a hard question again, because I'm sure you get something out of every conversation.
Yeah, definitely. So one guy, Ryan Gottfredson, he wrote a different book on mindsets called Success Mindsets, but he really comes from it from like a bit of a scientific approach, and he does a lot of coaching with businesses. But his book's great, but he just really went like really, really deep into the different types of mindsets that you need to have to be a successful leader. And that episode was really good and been one of like the best performing ones that I've had. And I've had him on the show since then to talk about different ways that mindsets show up and things. So he was like really great around not just the growth mindset, but like he was very specific around like the promotion versus prevention mindset, and open versus closed mindset and things, and just how you can like embody those as a leader. And so it was a really good like how to like actually improve on those things, and he gave a lot of like specific tips on doing them. Then another one was like another coach was Frank Dick, who was the head of the British Athletics for GB for like 12 years, I think, and he was also part of like the rugby things. I think he coached like Andre Agassi a bit, and he just like literally everything he said was basically like quotable. He just like endlessly.
I love that.
Like,
I love that, and I hate that.
Yeah,
it's like I think, God, how does someone learn that skill?
Definitely. As in, if you just had him in your corner, like you just constantly be inspired. So he really had like a lot of good advice from all the different things he'd been through with his years of being in like top level sports, and then applying that to business as well. So he was really a fun interview. And then that's going to sound a bit odd, but another one was a guy called Naum Kostuki, who used to be a business coach, and then he kind of like gave it all up. He was doing really well, and he just went to Costa Rica and kind of lived in the jungle, started a restaurant, which then became like the number one on the TripAdvisor restaurant in Costa Rica, which is really cool. But he's now becoming a woman, and he's just completely like questioning everything. And it was just such a kind of mind-blowing episode to just think about like your reality, and just he was just very, very open to like what life could be, or he just had a lot of huge insights on other things besides your sexuality. But also, it was just a really, really fascinating.
Well, that's definitely the opposite of a fixed mindset, isn't
it? Yes, that is for sure.
That's about as open a mindset as you can possibly get.
Yeah,
nothing is fixed. You can change anything if you choose to.
And after talking to him, I tried using Grindr for a bit, but it turns out I'm not gay. But I was like, but I was open to it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm a bit older than you. I think I'm probably a little bit more fixed in my way in that way. But hey, listen, everyone to each their own.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, listen, let's so just to finish this up, what's next for you, Sam? What's on the horizon with the podcast, with the business? What are your plans?
So, I've been in podcasting for so long, is that I do really enjoy interviewing people, but I've definitely been changing my format as I go along, and I'm planning to kind of make it a bit more specific around what I'm enjoying as a listener and where I think the trends are going, because there's just more and more people doing normal interviews. And so one like these fireside chats are quite fun. I'm still going to have like some of them, but I want to do more series on specific things. So like a series on how to change and like the different elements you need to do to like change yourself in these things. Or I'm actually going to start doing some things on like watching a movie and then going through the mindsets of the characters within it, and doing like a bit of a deep dive, geeking out on like a famous movie that people know, but like how the mindsets happen within them. And just kind of that's kind of all the content that I find people are engaging with and that I really enjoy lately. And so just like more excuses to have fun on the podcast. And like that's where my other podcast, which is Wiser Than Yesterday podcast, is me and a friend reading a book a week, and we'll just pick a different series where we'll go through like this last one we've just gone through the body, and like just different elements. Like we've done a book on metabolism, a book on how to breathe and like how to sleep, that kind of stuff, and just going a bit more in depth on things on my podcast. And then obviously just running the podcast app as well is the other main big thing. Haven't thought too far beyond that. I probably want to like write an album and do more like ultra running and this kind of stuff. But maybe have a bit of a break before starting another business. But how about you? You just
I'm gonna. Well, it's the podcast is interesting. Just to sort of jump, I like what you said about making it kind of more about what you're interested in. I think the thing about podcasting these days is that you can do that, right? Like I sort of talk about business a lot because of the name of the podcast, but I'm also not worried or afraid to not talk about that. So I bring people on the show who I just find interesting, and they can be in the world of sport, they can be musicians, actors. I had a guy called DJ Irie, who's the Miami Heat basketball team's like resident DJ, and we did a really great conversation about passion. There was a link back to business, of course, but it was more about how do you follow your passion? How do you really dive into that from a confidence perspective? So for me, I'm gonna do similar sort of stuff. I'm trying to bring in a mix of interesting people and relatively high profile people, partly because I want to have the opportunity to meet them. So there's a selfish nature to that, but I also want to be able to ask them some pretty deep questions that fit the profile of how I do interviews. Not the bog standard stuff, right? That you kind of can hear anywhere. And I've had a couple of good experiences with that as well, which normally it's interesting because you get to open up some stuff. I had Jay Abraham, who's a pretty prolific business thinker on the podcast quite recently. Yeah, he's really good. He loves this concept of going granular into things. He goes deeper than most people go into things. And that's where a lot of the magic lies. But what was cool about that is the interview was over an hour, but then he spent like another hour, maybe an hour and a half with me afterwards. And it was so good. It was good because he enjoyed the interview, right? But more importantly, it was like it allowed me to kind of go a little bit deeper into how he thought about things and stuff. So I get my own coaching from some of these extremely successful people as part of being able to, give back to people through the podcast anyway. So for me, I'm going to keep doing that. I'm doing more speaking now. I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff in North America. I've got big focus over there, partly off the back of Clubhouse. And then it's acquisitions. We've got 7 businesses at the moment, another 3 coming, and I launched a whole heap of programs around acquisitions where I teach it, but I also partner with other people who then go and source deals on my behalf. So I've tried to turn that whole ecosystem into a bit of a machine in its own right. So the rest of this year, 2021, is going to be, in those areas.
Wow, that's cool. I would just like to understand, like, what's the end goal for you? Is there a point where you're like going to be happy and sort of would work less, or is it you just love the process of buying and selling businesses? And
hell no, Sam. I'm not going to stop.
Yeah.
There isn't. Put it this way. It probably sounds like I work a lot, but I don't really work much. And I don't mean that like in some crazy, like, because I love what I do, I don't work a day of my life stuff. I mean, I leverage everything. So if I buy a business, I just have someone run it.
Yeah.
And I look at the numbers, on a weekly basis. I have a phone call on Mondays and sometimes on Mondays and Fridays, and that's it. And so I have a lot of free time to do other stuff. So nice. the end game for me is I love the concept of building an empire, a big portfolio of businesses. I like the idea of both income and impact, making a bigger difference. I want to set up a foundation. We haven't, we've got it on the plan. It just hasn't been scheduled because of all the other stuff we're doing. But we've got a foundation around entrepreneurship in developing countries that we want to do, really around mentorship and being able to take entrepreneurial education. So the stuff that you and I would know as how we do things, but it's not taught in schools. We want to be able to take that out to places where they're just not getting access to that type of thinking. So we're trying to, I've got a little bit of help with that, but I'm just trying to structure it at the moment. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's easier to buy a business than it is to try and set up a foundation like that, to do it well. But yeah, that's the end game. The end game is to live in the UK, live in the US, portfolio of 20 to 30 businesses, have this income and impact thing worked out really, really well, travel with my family, see everything I want to see, run ultra marathons, and just have a really fun life. Simple as that.
Cool. Well, good luck with all of that. And yeah, certainly happy to help if I can anyway. I mean, it seems like you kind of know what you're doing anyway. But,
well, yeah, I'm an old guy, mate. Remember, I'm like 47 this year, so I've been around the world a bit. So no, I'm good. The one thing I find is like as I've got older, not that I'm old, but as I've got older, I've become more clearer in everything. Right. Yeah. So I don't have the shiny object stuff going on or any of that stuff. And like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I like doing. I know who I like hanging out with. I'm very, very, very precious with my time. So, I don't waste time. I'm like, boom, everything is like, and that's something that's just like how I like to live. It makes me feel that to me is freedom.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Something I've been looking at recently is like just ways to kind of give myself more time. I was like, started to take myself a bit more seriously, just give myself a bit more of a budget of myself. Like, okay, how can I be more content just by spending more money And most of that is just going towards ways that I just give myself more time to do the other things that I enjoy. And
right, yeah,
that's
yeah, you got to leverage, right? I only like, it doesn't always work like this, but it works mostly like this, is I like to spend time doing things that I'm either good at or I love doing. And then I outsource everything else.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you're the person that like hooked me up with the first like outsourcing agency, and
Yeah,
that definitely changed.
I remember that. That was that conversation.
Yeah.
There you go, mate. That was a while ago.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, listen, that's it. We've been speaking for a good hour. Hopefully everyone's got some interesting, this is a fireside chat. I told you it's informal, everybody. But I think, you know what, we covered some quite interesting stuff, which I thought we would, that will be useful for anyone who's on their journey, be that their entrepreneurial, their business journey, their life journey. So thanks for coming on the show, Sam. It's been some time in the planning, but it's great to finally get the chance to do it. There you go.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, listen, thank you very much, mate. All the best with everything. And catch up again soon.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thanks for listening. Before you head on to another episode, what's your biggest aha moment from today's discussion? For me, I am still mind blown by the fact that you can buy entire businesses that are great businesses with money that isn't yours. And just the concept that you should think a lot bigger, perhaps you really expect, is just a huge one. And I'm definitely going to keep that. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with other people, post about it on social media, or chat to me on social media and leave a rating and a review, because that would be great. You can also share insights with other listeners or even me on Reason FM. That's a social podcasting app and the best way to discover new podcasts and connect with hosts like me and other listeners. And also, don't forget that I run the other podcast called Wiser Than Yesterday with my co-host Nico, and we expose you to different perspectives and dive into the world's most thought-provoking and inspiring books. So that's all for the episode today. And with that, keep learning and keep growing.